Hello and welcome to the next episode of the midierror podcast, where we speak to all kinds of people who work in sound and music. On the show this time, we've got Chris Spedding, who has had a phenomenal career working with a ridiculous amount of artists, which include Roxy Music, Bryan, Elton John, Ginger Baker, Nick Mason, Art Garfunkel, Roger Daultry, Joan Armatrading, David Essex, Paulo Nutini, Tom Waits, and many, many more. Chris also produced the first demos for the Sex Pistols back in the 70s, and he's had a pretty decent solo career as well, with his track Motorbiking, and more recently with his 2015 album Joyland, which featured Bryan, Ferry and Johnny Marr. Thank you very much for listening. Once again, you can support Sonic State on our Patreon. You can also join us on YouTube if you prefer. Stick around to the end of the episode and I will recommend an interview I think is worth your time. But for the moment, let's get into the chat with Chris. And the first thing I asked him about was whereabouts he is.
I'm in Sussex, the south coast of the UK, on the beach. We've got an apartment overlooking the beach, so I have a view of the English Channel, and it's a couple of hours drive from London, so it's not that convenient for London. But I do a few sort of local gigs with an outfit called the Brighton Beach Boys, and they do Beach Boys stuff, and I'm doing something actually day after tomorrow as a tribute to Herbie Flowers, the bass player. And we're doing some of his songs that he played on, which luckily I played on some of them as well. So it's so that's the kind of thing I'm in the middle of doing at the moment.
Great. How long have you been down by the seaside?
Let's see, about 10 years. When I relocated to the UK from Los Angeles about 2006, and I lived in London for a while because that's what I knew from before, and I soon realised I didn't like the big city anymore, and the traffic is such that it takes about an hour to get anywhere. So I thought if I moved out of town, it would be quite a nice thing to only be in London when I need to be and drive from wherever I am to London. So I ended up getting further and further away from London, and so here I am.
Amazing. And how was living in America? How long did you live in LA for?
Longer than you think. I left London to move to New York in 1978, and so I was there for almost 30 years. After about 14 years in New York, I moved to Los Angeles about sort of 1992. So, and then I just basically followed where the work was. I was getting work from Bryan Ferry, working on the Bryan Ferry's road band in the new millennium. That kind of started in 2001. So I thought, something's telling me to move back to my old stomping ground, so I moved back, and I've been back ever since.
Amazing. And from my own personal experience, there's a huge contrast between New York and LA in terms of experience, lifestyle.
Yes, there is.
Culture.
I loved the lifestyle in Los Angeles. I wish I got there before. But when I got to New York, there was this kind of, you're probably aware of this, is probably a kind of snobbishness about New Yorkers. Oh, you don't go to LA, they're all very flaky out there, and this is the real America is here in New York. And of course, I'm trying to assimilate my new American friends. I bought into this for quite a while, and then I got a job producing a job that they paid me to come over to LA to work, and I thought, I wish I'd been here before. This is quite nice. I like this lifestyle. And then looking a bit further into everything, so much of the music industry is based in LA. You think if you got a meeting with somebody at RCA or CBS in New York that you're going to get somewhere, But that guy behind that desk in New York, he can't sign anybody. He can't make any decisions. He's got to call somebody in LA. Took me a long time. I'm a bit of a slow learner. It took me a long time to pick up on that. The place to be is actually LA, and all the great recording studios where the Beach Boys recorded, where Elvis recorded a lot of his stuff, his great stuff. Because I was always a big Elvis fan. And all the the Phil Spector stuff, the Wrecking Crew, and all those guys. Must have been a great time to have been in LA. And I sort of came along and I saw the buildings. Oh, this used to be the Gold Star where Phil Spector worked. It's not now. It's something else now. It's like a pizza parlor now or something. I'd find out all these great locations and a lot of music history, more so than New York. New York sort of. There's the era of the Brill Building, which I was very into, Carole King and all that stuff, and Neil Sedaka. And when I first came, I was like a bit sort of starry-eyed about like that. I've actually made it to New York, where all my music comes from, because I was so much into American music. That I kept finding out that, oh yeah, that record that I thought was recorded in New York was actually recorded in LA. So I'm glad I actually got to LA in the end. I just wish I'd got there sooner.
Yeah, it's a good climate as well, isn't it, out there? Nice.
Oh yeah, the lifestyle's great. And also in when I was in New York, nobody in New York has a car. They can't, like a garage to park your car costs as much as an apartment. So I love driving cars. I had a car in London. Got to America and of course didn't have a car. So because I was in New York. So I was happy to get to LA, which is a city that's built on the motor car. With all the freeways and
absolutely is.
In fact, there's very, very little going on in terms of the transport. Public transport is everybody's got a car.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah,
and when you get to if you get to your destination in your car, there's always a parking space, which is not the case in London or New York. So I love the lifestyle and the infrastructure, as you could say.
Yeah. I believe at one time, did you drive a car that had a shark fin on the top and
in
some
the
teeth
Sharks
on the front?
Yeah. In the Sharks, that's 1972. We've had some fiberglass teeth on the front, and there was a fin on the roof, a shark's fin. Unfortunately, it only lasted a few months because we smashed it up coming back from a gig. So that was the end of that. There are very few photographs. People didn't take so many photographs back in the 70s as people do now. So there's only about two or three photographs of that car. Yeah, it was a Pontiac Le Mans, which we had a paint job with sort of wavy, sort of looked like a bit of a sea scene on it, and fiberglass teeth on the front, and the fiberglass fin on the roof. It's actually pretty cool.
Very cool. I imagine that would go down a storm nowadays.
Yeah.
There is that famous house with a shark sticking out the top, isn't there, somewhere in England?
Oh, is that?
Yeah, a guy's built a shark sort of crashing in through his roof.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, the band only lasted a couple of years of trying, but it was it was a time, 1972 to 1974.
And you were signed to Island Records with the Sharks?
Yes, we were. Yeah, we put out a couple of albums, but they weren't that successful. Although the press was very kind to us, they liked us, the media liked us, and this was all, of course, just a couple of years before the punk thing happened, where the press and the media everything changed for them. And fortunately for me, I was a little involved in the early days of the punk movement, but. So I was able to experience that from the inside, which was quite interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there is so many references to the punk scene in your looking back through your discography and your story.
Right.
You did also mention Phil Spector there, and I believe you did have you worked with him at one point.
There was a call. We several other guitar players, session guitar players, got a call one Easter Sunday. I remember it was Easter Sunday because the Musicians Union allowed us to charge double scale on a public holiday.
Brilliant.
And we got to Trident Studios, and there was none other than Phil Spector there, and he gave us a chord chart, and there was about 3 or 4 of us playing 12-string guitars, and we played this sort of backing track. And later on, we realised that it was, the My Sweet Lord George Harrison song with all the acoustic guitars strumming away. Well,
Wow.
it was that sort of sound. Now, whether I'm on that track, we don't know, because it's a very strange way of getting all acoustic guitars on a track to book people like that. I think Phil Spector was trying some kind of experiment with how to get a sound, and hired us to, I don't really think we were on My Sweet Lord, because why wouldn't George Harrison himself be playing all those guitars? So yeah, that was my exposure to Phil Spector. I mean, it was nothing to remark, right, apart from the fact that it was the world famous Phil Spector who I loved his work, and we didn't know about All Things Must Pass and that album at that time, so we couldn't say, oh yes, I was on that, and I was on this track and that track, which quite often happens in the recording world. You'll do a track, and if the producer doesn't like the bass part, it maybe hire another bass player the next day to sort of replace it. So you can't say, oh, I'm definitely playing the guitar on that track, because they might have replaced it. There's nothing set in stone. It's a very strange world. So I was in the same room as Phil Spector, yes, but whether what I played ever got used on anything, I have no idea. That's kind of the nature of the work I was doing at the time.
Yeah, I found that quite intriguing when in the research I've done, where you've said that there is a bit of an ambiguity with what you're doing.
Yeah,
You don't necessarily know exactly where it's going or where it's been used.
yeah. You just, it's like calling in a plumber to fix the leak. In fact, plumbers get better paid.
Yeah, I mean, Phil Spector is amazing because he really kind of championed those short, sweet pop songs with
Oh
very
yeah, and
powerful short
he wrote some
pieces.
of them as well. He wrote like
Yeah,
those Ronettes things, and the he's so.
Marlene Love.
In fact, I think He's So Fine, he might have produced it by the Chiffons, which was the thing that George got into trouble with stealing the song, My Sweet
Oh,
Lord.
really? Mm-hmm.
She's So Fine, or He's So Fine by the Chiffons, was a Phil Spector production, which I always thought was very strange, because that was the song that George Harrison was accused of stealing. The
Wow.
big court case. So I thought, well, that's strange. Phil Spector produced both of them. Wouldn't you have thought during the George Harrison sessions that Phil would have said, hey, you better change that chord or change this melody, because I know that I was involved in another song just like this. He kept quiet about it, and then got involved in the lawsuit to get some even more money off George. Which I'm not sure how that panned out. It's probably worth checking, Googling that to check out how that actually went. But I
I
thought
will, yeah.
that's very strange. Why didn't Phil
That is,
Spector speak up and get help George in that situation? Anyway,
it's kind of like sounds like an inside sort of plan or something
well,
underhand.
I just saw something on
God
YouTube
knows.
where the Alan Klein, who was the guy who was an American guy who was involved with the Stones and the Beatles, and he was involved. He bought the rights to He's So Fine, and then sued George, who he was supposed to be managing. So there's a
Wow.
lot of weird shit going on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
of course,
wow.
before I sort of say anything about it, it'd be worthwhile doing the fact check, to make sure that I'm not making stuff up.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There is do you find that as as someone who's been part of many records behind the scenes, do you think part of what you've done as a guitarist is also, I don't really know what the word is, being like discreet and kind of
Oh yeah, there's certain things that you mustn't. It's only sensible not to get yourself into trouble by talking out of school about people that are still alive, or even people
exactly.
that are recently dead. You shouldn't do that either.
Mm,
But on that subject, it's remarkable that having been on the ground floor, as it were, of a few remarkable musical historical events, like say the formation of Sex Pistols and their early recordings, which I produced, and what actually went down. The relationship between John Lydon and Malcolm McLaren, and all the movies, TV series, and autobiographies that have been written. I always am amazed by how many different versions of the same story. Because I'm looking at that movie that was made about the Sex Pistols, and I'm saying, wait a minute, I was there when that happened, and that's it's not what went down. Something different went down. So that is quite interesting to see. There are as many versions of a famous music business story as there are participants. In fact, even more, because there are people that will interpret and write about it. And I can say, hey, wait a minute, I was there. I was the guy standing in the corner.
yeah, and I guess over time as well, we also, I think all of us, our memories maybe distort and change. And
Yeah.
actually, I once had an incident where we were recording something in a public space, but we didn't get permission to record it.
Oh,
And somebody came over and told us, like an official, somebody who was working there said we couldn't record, but he was quite aggressive. And what was really funny is how I remembered how he approached us and what it actually looked like on playback, because we were recording with a 360-degree camera at the time.
yeah.
And how I remembered it was completely different from reality. And I remember thinking, wow, there's a lesson in that somewhere.
Right, yeah. Oh, well, if you're out on the street, for instance, and filming something, and someone walks by who's out walking their dog, you've got to grab that person and get like a release signed. You realise you were just on, and you might be in a movie, you might be on the TV, because you don't know. Maybe you shouldn't have been out there walking a dog. He told his wife he was going to go somewhere else. So who knows? Anybody when you're in public, you've got to be very careful to grab everybody that's, even if they're just walking by, get them to sign a release.
Absolutely.
And they might ask for money. You would have to pay them
a percentage of revenue. Yeah, revenue
well
share.
Just it's only professional, basically, when you think about it.
And going back to the you mentioned the Sex Pistols there, I believe there was a shop in London which Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren owned,
Yeah,
that you would frequent. Is that right?
yeah. Around about the time of my one and only hit record, Motorbiking, I was affecting a sort of 50s biker rocker sort of look, which was not that fashionable at that time, because on Top of the Pops, when I would go on Top of the Pops, there'd be guys like David Bowie or Roy Wood of the Move, who would have flared pants, platform shoes, and long hair, and I would look completely different. I looked like a greasy rocker. Now, and the style was reminiscent of the 50s, and you could get vintage gear in shops in London in 1975, but you couldn't get new stuff. You couldn't get stuff that had just been made. You could get like a bit ratty looking sort of jackets. And Vivienne and Malcolm had this shop called Let It Rock, and they had brand new 50s style clothing in it. So that's how I got to know them, and it's how they got to know me. Later on, they called their shop Sex, But when I knew them and when I was buying the 50s style stuff, it was called Let It Rock. So that's how I got to know them, and they got to know. I was probably one of the few music business people that they knew, because their style of clothing was not being worn. In that respect, I was a couple of years ahead of the curve in terms of the fashion iconography. So yeah, that's how I became aware of them.
Great, and you ended up recording their Sex Pistol, producing
I
their
ended up
early tapes.
producing their very first time in the studio, their demo tapes that got them their deal with EMI. Because I could help them, because I realized the full story is it was actually Chrissie Hynde, many years before she formed the Pretenders, called me up, because she used to work for Vivian and Malcolm as well. She used to do a bit of modelling and a bit of saleswoman in the shop on a weekend. So she knew about the Pistols and said, "You got to come and see these guys. They're at the 100 Club tonight." So I sort of made it down there and saw this band. There was about a dozen people in the audience, and by the time they'd finished, there was half a dozen people, because they'd frightened people off. So I thought, I was quite impressed with them, and I was able to see that no A&R guy from any record company was going to come and see these people, because the word on the street was that these people are terrible and don't bother with these guys. So I thought, well, that's a shame. What I can do, knowing the recording business, knowing some record companies and knowing some studios, because I was a session guy at that time, I can help them. I can take them in the studio and record a 3-song demo, because that was the wisdom at the time. If you got 3 good songs on a demo, and it sounded like there could be a hit record there, you'll get signed up by a record company, if you're lucky. So I thought, okay, I went to their rehearsal place in Denmark Street, and I said, okay, guys, play us all your songs, play the whole set that you got, all your best songs. So I chose Pretty Vacant, No Feelings, and Problems. They hadn't written God Save the Queen at that time, so I chose those 3 as the best, well, most listenable, most radio worthy, and most likely to interest an A&R guy. And went in the studio and we did it, and the rest is history, as it were. We did it in 1976. Took it to Mickey Most of Rec Records, who I was signed to, who was the guy that produced my hit record, Motorbiking, and took it to Chris Thomas, who ended up producing them. And yeah, it worked. It worked that once.
Incredible. And what was it that you were able to, if the A&R men weren't looking for that kind of thing at the time, what was it that you think that you were able to bring to them that allowed them to be recognized?
Well, a little bit of credibility, because it was me. In fact, I would go down to some of there's a place called a Speakeasy where we used to hang out, and I would be approached by one of the people that used to write for the NME or the New Musical Express or Sounds Magazine, Melody Maker. Of course, these guys would be out of work in about a year hence, because all those writers for the New Musical Express and Melody Maker, it's a total sea change when the punk thing started. They'd say to me, "Hey Chris, you've got to better watch it with those Sex Pistols, because you've got a great reputation in the business, Chris, and you've got to hurt yourself if you associate with them." So I said, "Well, that's interesting. Each to his own. When did you hear them?" "Oh, I've not heard them, but everybody knows they're terrible." So with that reaction, I thought, there's something I can do here, because they're not they weren't terrible. I thought they were actually what the music business needed, because the music business was a bit stagnant in 1976. Like the front pages of the musical press was full of bands like ELP, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, all the old guard, as it were, and needed something new. And it was obvious to me that the Sex Pistols and New Wave was the way to go. It was something new. In fact, when the Melody Maker and all these other magazines saw the light, as it were, they would put photographs of the Sex Pistols on the cover, and it'd be the magazine that was selling like hotcakes in the northern provinces when nobody would have heard a note of their music because they hadn't made a record. And yet there was a music paper. This is quite unprecedented. It's quite interesting. You'd never get that in music history. You know, if Elvis got on the front in 1956, it's because you'd heard Heartbreak Hotel or something, right? But you did never get like a new band on the cover featured on a music paper when nobody had heard them. It's the way they looked. It was the way they looked, and the attitude that they had. It frightened everybody, but all the young kids were fascinated.
New from Cherry Audio is the Ensoniq ESQ1, a virtual synthesizer that honours the 40th anniversary of the classic ESQ1 polyphonic hybrid synthesizer. The plugin features the original 32 waveforms, licensed from Creative Technology, which allows for an authentic recreation of complex sounds from 1986. It includes modern features such as extensive modulation options, rhythmic pattern generation, polyphonic aftertouch and MPE, along with integrated effects. The Ensoniq ESQ1 includes over 400 presets that blend classic factory sounds with new designs, and it also supports data exchange with the original hardware. Ensoniq ESQ1 by Cherry Audio, still the one, and available now at cherryaudio.com.
Yeah, it's like the perfect recipe, isn't it? Just something that the kids love, the parents are scared of.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for great exposure, I suppose.
Yep.
And where did you get your production skills from? I know.
Sitting in the studio being produced for years. My session started in 1969. Songs for a Tailor by Jack Bruce. And I did a lot of stuff with Harry Nilsson, the Without You record, which I actually wasn't on because there's no acoustic guitar strumming away on that, but I was on the rest of it. The rest of that album, Nilsson, Schmilsson, and some of the David Essex hits. Yes, I was quite an experienced session guy, so I knew what a producer did.
Was it through like osmosis, seeing the mad?
Yeah, I knew. I was fascinated by, as you say, the Phil Spector example, and even though I was kind of part of what you might call the London version of the Wrecking Crew. I was on loads and loads of sessions. You know, there was Barry Morgan was the drummer, Clem Cattini was the drummer, Herbie Flowers was the bass player. Alan Parker and me were guitar players, and it was quite a time, the early 70s, for British studio work, some good stuff. Blue Mink were playing, and then there was David Bowie and Mark Bolan and Roxy Music and all that stuff. I was part of that scene, and I learned how. I was able, and I was also able to do my own records. I was EMI Harvest, who had their studio Abbey Road, so I was able to go into Abbey Road and make my own records and learn, or experiment with stuff that I'd learned being produced by other great producers. So I was the guy who knew how to do that. I was able to bring my experience to these young guys who had not been in the studio before, and some of them were only 20 years old. I at the time was in my 30s, which is why I never really sort of considered myself to be a punk, because I didn't. Well, you've got to be angry to be a punk, and I wasn't angry. I'd been quite successful. I just had a hit record, so I wasn't angry enough. I was a bit of an old fart, basically, except that I didn't look like one. but I was what they called a... And also I knew quite secretly the Sex Pistols were big fans of Roxy music, but they'd never have admitted that back then. So I was a guy that not only knew Roxy music, but I knew Chris Thomas, their producer. So I was the perfect guy to sort of introduce them to the people that they wanted to work with.
That's great, because I can imagine for lots of session musicians, just doing the job and doing the work is one thing, but you were clearly interested in the whole process and learning more and developing.
Right, and interested when something new came along. Saw it immediately. Took everybody else a while. Another name that Caroline Coon was a journalist for the Melody Maker. She used to review the singles every week. She was a person that got the Sex Pistols and the new punk bands in the magazine, because she used to go to editorial conferences, and talk them up. So she deserves a little bit of credit as well. Chrissie Hynde and Caroline Coon, those two women, deserve quite a lot of credit for starting off the whole new wave thing.
That is amazing. And it seems like you've been really embedded in music since like the late 60s.
Yeah, well, yeah, since before that actually, but I started doing sessions in the late 60s in 1969. I've been doing stuff with jazz fusion bands, and I was a bit of a jazz snob in the 60s. I didn't dig what was going on in the pop world, the rock world, even though when I first started, you probably heard of the skiffle era, Lonnie Donegan and all that stuff. Well, I was in, like the Beatles as well. I was the same generation as the Beatles, so I was involved in the skiffle thing as a teenager, and we'd listen to the same American R&B like Motown and Stax and all that stuff.
Following on from the jazz, in the 70s, you were in a band called Nucleus, and I believe you won first prize in the Montreux Jazz Festival.
Oh, we did, yeah. That got us to Newport Jazz Festival in America. That was my first taste of America.
What was that like?
It was great.
It
was great. I remember there was people like Nina Simone, Roberta Flack, Albert King, Louis Armstrong. Just before he died, it was 1970. I got to see all these legends, and we got to play ourselves. I enjoyed that band Nucleus, but by that time I really wanted to play rock, not jazz rock, but pure rock. And I was more into Bob Dylan and the Basement Tapes than I was into Miles Davis fusion. So I left Nucleus and moved on.
Yeah, and I think 5 years on from that was your hit, which you mentioned you were on Top of the Pops with.
Yeah.
Motorbiking. So yeah, there's a big change really there in like your output in that time.
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, there was the Sharks from 72 to 74. There was the Sharks, and the motorbiking record came after the Sharks. There's a big change in my sort of approach to playing with the Sharks, because the Sharks got me out there on the boards, as it were, doing gig after gig after gig, live gig, and presenting my music to the audience directly instead of in the studio, which got me into being more of a live rock and roll guitar player instead of just a session guy. So that was quite an important change. I came out of the Sharks, a different type of musician that I went in. And then I started. I was not the main singer. The main I wasn't a singer, but I wasn't the main songwriter in the Sharks. I was happy not to be that. I was happy to be the guy that did the arrangements and oversaw the overall sound of the band. So when I came out of the Sharks, I had a whole bunch of half-written songs ready, and a different approach to what I wanted to see in music, because the Sharks have been like a failed experiment. We tried to be like Free was, or Bad Company, but we didn't hit that didn't hit our stride properly in that. So I played a little bit with after the Sharks broke up with John Cale. That's how I met Chris Thomas, the producer. So I played a couple of albums and a couple of tours with John Cale, which got me into opening my ears to a different type of music. I'd not really been aware of the Velvet Underground before. So when I decided to try and write something to keep me going, I was without a band. We'd been dropped from Ireland. I didn't have a record company or any way of making records. So I looked at the top 20 or the top 40, whatever you want to call it, and thought, now what is in here? What do I like? What do I don't like? And I didn't like hardly anything that was being put out in the mid-70s. I thought it was all a bit schlucky and not very exciting. And I thought, oh, what used to excite me when I was like a 13-year-old, we're going back to the mid-50s now, what excited me to go out and spend my hard-earned pocket money on a record? Because it was quite a thing. That's part of the fascination of the hit record. What is it that makes a young person spend that money on that record, not the other record? This record, it's got to be this record. And so I came up with, well, what I used to really like was the early Elvis, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Little Richard, that sort of thing. So I thought I'm going to try and write a song that has that atmosphere to it, that excitement to it. So that's how I came up with motorbiking. And I thought, well, I knew how to produce a record, but I didn't know how to produce myself. And I'd been on records where there'd been a great producer like Mickey Most. I'd worked with Donovan, who produced Mickey Most. So I took motorbiking to Mickey Most. And that was a good move because he produced a hit record for me. So that philosophy, that approach worked for me. That once. Not again. I tried to apply it again and it didn't work, but at least I got the one hit out of it.
Absolutely. And I think producing your own work I think it's easy to lose perspective sometimes, isn't it? Like you haven't got an objective view of everything like an external person would. How do you feel about that?
Well, I did have a way of making my own records because I was in a band called Pete Brown's Battered Ornaments. They broke up. And they broke up without anybody in the band wanting to take up the contract. And our managers, who were Black Hill Enterprises at the time, said, well, Chris, we've got to produce some product for EMI Harvest. So I said, all right, well, I'll make a solo record, then I'll write a few songs. So I'd started doing sessions, so I knew a little bit about how to make a record. And we had Abbey Road at our disposal. So I knew how to make a record, and I tried to produce myself because nobody else was doing it. So by the time Motorbiking was written, I knew that I needed a professional producer outside of myself to help realize this song. So I'd been around the block a few times by then, and so that's why I went to Mickey Most. We got on really well. We were so and I ended up on his record label, and all the Chris Spedding records that are worth listening to are on the Rec label.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was Pete Brown and the Battered Ornaments.
Yeah.
You did well, there's two things on that. First of all, is you did a couple of Peel sessions with John Peel with the Battered Ornaments, I believe.
I don't think those must have been terrible. The band was like very, 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 very experimental. We thought, in fact, for the 60s, we were kind of the punks of the 60s because we sort of were kind of iconoclastic and didn't want to do things how everybody else. We thought we were like the mothers of invention, Frank Zappa, although Frank Zappa was a little bit more organised than we were. We were very disorganised. We were all ex-jazzers backing up Pete Brown. And I was the only one that was really, really interested in making a genuine rock record or having a rock career. So that's the story there.
I'd just love to ask you about the album name, A Meal You Can Shake Hands With in the Dark.
Well, that was Pete being enigmatic. We didn't even have it. I don't think we even had a song called that. It was just one of his it's typical Pete Brown. He's a wordsman.
Unbelievable. I just read that title. I had to read that title about 4 times just to make sure I'd actually read that properly.
Yeah, that's
It's
Pete.
brilliant.
That's Pete Brown for you.
Yeah, and I listened to a little bit of the Battered Ornaments, and I just find it so amazing, the kind of stereo image where you've got kind of drums panned hard right.
Oh,
You've got the
that was
basses.
what we thought was stereo in those days. Well, I think we only had maybe 4 track, because the Beatles did Sergeant Pepper on a 4 track. It might have just been 8 track, but it was the 4 track concept of recording stereo. All the overdubs would be done on the other side of the stereo, and the band would be on the other one side. Yeah, I haven't heard those records for so long, and I don't even know what that is, having the drums on one side. But I know from other records, even Beatle records, when they were using 4 track, they would just record everything on 1 track, and then all the overdubs and the vocals would be on another track, and they didn't know enough to sort of make a stereo picture out of it. So it was just like the drums here, vocal here, guitar solo here, and yeah.
It's really fascinating. I think, see, the first thing I do when I'm listening to music like that is turn off one of the speakers so I can just
Well,
listen to only the bass or the vocal.
right. Well,
It's really
the
fantastic.
thing about pop music, and especially English pop music in the 70s, 60s, that the Beatles did, they're the optimum version of their song when they put out, say, something like Paperback Writer or whatever it was, or Strawberry Fields Forever. They would do it in mono. There'd be one speaker in the studio. They'd do it in mono. It was only when they started getting great sales in America, where there was we didn't have FM, it was just AM radio. So there's no point in making a stereo recording anyway for pop music, because it was always get broadcast in mono. And
I see.
so the optimum thing that the Beatles and George Martin and the engineer heard when they were making all that great music was in mono. And it was later, when they've got the great mono recording and great mono mix of, say, Paperback Writer, they say, "Oh, that's great, a great day's work, chaps. Okay, you can all go home now. We'll just spend the rest of the day doing the stereo mix," which would be the least important thing. But it's all people listen to now, thinking that was it, but it wasn't. It's what they ran off when everybody's tired, and the bar had closed down, and they couldn't even get a cup of coffee to keep them awake. Then they did the stereo version, which we all listen to now.
It's really fascinating
Which people ought to be a little more aware of that. That's not what you want to hear. If you want to hear what the Beatles put out for us, they put out the mono version. Some of the later albums, like the White Album, maybe were done in stereo, but those early singles, She Loves You and Please Please Me, mono. If you hear a version with the drums in the corner, that's not what the Beatles want you to hear. That's what they put out, basically inspired by the American FM radio situation. It was a lot later on that we had FM radio and stereo in England.
It's fascinating. It's never occurred to me that AM radio is in mono and FM's in stereo, but it kind of makes sense.
I think I'm right there. That's another Googleable thing you can check.
Googleable. It's very Googleable.
Very Googleable.
Yeah, you've I mean, obviously every time you get interviewed, people must list all of the people that you work with and all of the bands you work with, and the solo stuff you've put out. I'm going to try not to do that, but it would be interesting to talk about your relationship with Bryan Ferry and Roxy Music, and you mentioned it briefly earlier. Yeah, how did that come about, and how has that changed over the years?
The period that I was in the Sharks with the Island, Roxy Music was also at Island, and we were a new band when Roxy Music was doing their second album, a second tour in about 1972. and we supported them in their UK tour. So I got to know them. I got to know Phil Manzanera, Andy Mackay, Paul Thompson, and Eno. Eno was still in the band then, and Bryan. In fact, a couple of ex-Sharks got to play on Eno's "Here Come the Warm Jets" album. I played on it. As a result of us doing the UK tour, supporting them as in the Sharks. So we knew of each other. And a little later on, 1974, just when I'd left the Sharks, I was in the studio with Bryan doing Let's Stick Together. I didn't actually work with Roxy Music until a little later, after I'd come back from America, where I worked with him on their Roxy Music reunion tour in 2001. Or was it 2001, something like that. So I did a tour with Bryan Ferry. In Your Mind, it's the album called In Your Mind. This was before I left for America. This was in 1977. So I did the whole world tour with Bryan, and we had a couple of singles out. So that was I'd collaborated quite a lot with Bryan Ferry.
Yeah, and how do you describe that experience? What's he like to work with?
It's very interesting, very interesting. As I was just like the guitar player. I wasn't like really in the band creatively. I was just the guy who got called up when he needed some guitar. But I was in quite a lot of the Let's Stick Together album, and I was on quite a lot of the Let's Stick Together, the In Your Mind album. And of course I did the tour as a lead guitar player. But one thing I always, during the Let's Stick Together time, we did a whole bunch of blues records, like Jimmy Reed covers, Wilbert Harrison. Wilbert Harrison was the guy who originally did Let's Stick Together. And Bryan was always very insistent on playing us the original blues record of these. Shame, Shame, Shame was the Jimmy Reed one. Let's Stick Together was the Wilbert Harrison one. And he wanted us to get the atmosphere dead right, get every detail, every nuance right. And I remember sort of thinking to myself, well, is this a bit odd? You don't want to have the record sounding exactly the same as the one you're trying to copy. You want to sort of change it a little bit. Why doesn't he want to change it and make it more sort of contemporary? Because these were old R&B records from the 50s and 60s, and this was the 70s. And the remarkable thing is that after we tried so hard to copy these records, his versions of those songs, like Let's Stick Together, just sound like typical Bryan Ferry. After we tried so hard to sort of make them sound like an old R&B guys. So it's a tribute to his personality as an artist, that he could do anything as closely to the original as he can do, and yet it still sounds like Bryan Ferry. It doesn't sound remotely like the original record at all. So that's my observation of working with Bryan Ferry.
Yeah, great. Sounds like a very meticulous kind of way of working as well.
He knows what he wants, and he usually ends up getting it. Fortunately for us. So yeah, I'm very proud of the records that I did with Bryan Ferry.
Introducing the Novation Launch Control XL3, a control surface for your entire setup. Get hands-on with your entire workflow. Launch Control XL's 8 precision faders, 24 endless rotary encoders, and 16 assignable buttons give you tactile control over all major doors, right out of the box with instant visual feedback. And with intuitive custom mapping for all your plugins and hardware, Novation Launch Control XL makes an ideal studio centerpiece. Control any setup, go deep with a single device, or get to grips with your entire production, mixdown or performance. Whether you're in the box, hardware-based, or a mixture of the two, Novation's Launch Control XL is a creative controller that suits your needs.
going back a little bit to like session recording in the beginning, like how did you learn about that world, and how was that something that you started doing?
I never thought when I was coming up in the 60s that I would had the aptitude for being a session guy, because I knew that you needed to sight read music, be very quick on the uptake, never make mistakes. So I thought I didn't really want to be that sort of player. I wanted to be more of a spontaneous, creative player, and I didn't think that my sight reading was good enough. But in actual fact, you don't need to be the greatest. Not many guitar players are good sight readers. I would get on a session and I'd see something written out in music, whatever you call it,
Notation.
Notation, yeah. And I think, oh dear, I don't know whether I can play this. And maybe somebody sitting next to me, probably Herbie Flowers, would say, and I'd say to Herbie, can you just sing me these two bars here? Because they keep coming up. And he'd sing me, da, 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 da. And I go, turn my guitar right up, and he said, what you mean? I do the hooligan rock and roll version of what Herbie had just sung me. And there would be a situation where the producer would come bouncing out of the studio and said, that's just what I wanted. Just what I wanted to hear, only I didn't know how to write it. But you knew how to play it. Book that man again. So it so happened that I had an aptitude. I was able to do what they wanted. They didn't want somebody to sort of play exactly what was written. They wanted me to interpret it in a rock and roll way. I was able to do that. In fact, my shortcomings as a sight reader helped me do that. So that's kind of what a sort of story of how I suddenly became flavour of the month for all these pop sessions. Not so good on the orchestral sessions like that. If I was booked as a guitar player on a Mantovani session, I wouldn't have done so well probably.
Yeah, and you did in terms of orchestral stuff. You worked on the War of the Worlds tour with Jeff Wayne as well.
Yeah, well, when we did the War of the Worlds recording, it was basically just a chord chart and put in what we felt like doing.
Oh, excellent.
And like 30 years later, when we started doing the touring, I got presented with these transcribed scores, which looked frightening. I thought, I can't play that. And then I sort of look at it closely and sort of try and work out what the phrase was. I thought, oh, I remember playing that. That was my riff in 1977. But it looked frightening when to see it written down. I'd never seen it written down before. I just played it from the chord chart. So I was able to do it. But I did do some orchestral sessions. It was the Madman Across the Water with Elton John was an orchestral session. It was done at Trident under the baton of Paul Buckmaster, who did the proper arrangement. He was standing there with the baton and conducting us, and I was sight reading. I didn't contribute anything of my own. I was sight reading the part of Madman Across the Water. So I did do those sessions, but my part was usually pretty basic.
Yeah, and do you find you have like a comfort zone in the world of music, or I mean, some people maybe would seek to be as far away from their comfort zone as possible. How do you see that?
Well, I think my strength was playing a good rhythm part with the right groove and the right licks, as opposed to not necessarily a solo part. Usually on these pop sessions, you do like three songs in 3 hours, and then everybody's packed up and went home. And quite often, the producer would say, "Hey, Chris, can you just stay behind for a couple of minutes and put a solo on at the end of this song?" And so that there'd be no sort of concentrated crafting of a solo. It would just be, okay, I know what the chords are at the end. There's the two chords, and I'm just going to wail away, bluesy type bass stuff. And they usually liked it because it was just like added to the excitement of the record. That would be not necessarily a comfort zone because you didn't have a chance to sort of craft what you wanted to do to do something remarkable. I thought that I was good at doing the riffs, the grooves, playing a good groove along with the drummer and the bass player. But there's a thing amongst session guys. I learned this in Nashville when I worked in Nashville. If you played a track and you played a little awkward riff that kind of didn't really fit, one of the session guys would just say, "That's a groove buster right there." You know what I mean? You know, in other words, you spoil the groove because you did something that's too out of the character for the song. You didn't help the song. You got to help the song. You got to help the song get to the middle eight. You got to help it get to the last chorus. You got to help the song when it's doing a little bit of verse. But you mustn't draw attention to yourself. You must always help the groove. So you get. I remember this Nashville musician sort of coming and saying, "Right there, that's a groove buster." So we do another take, making sure not to introduce the groove buster again. So I always sort of prided myself on being that guy that didn't give you a groove buster, and helped the groove and helped the song, and helped. I would take as my model the sort of guitar riffs that you'd get from the Beatles song. You couldn't hear this Beatles song without this two-note guitar thing, you know, like on da 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 da, come on. That sort of da 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 da. That's just three notes. You cannot hear that song without those three notes. And if I can put a couple of those are not groove busters, those are groove helpers. So if I can find a groove helper, then I'm happy.
The groove helper, yeah, and I think everyone's experienced being a groove buster at some point.
You must always try and avoid that. Yeah.
And do you think you have a signature sound? Like, obviously we're doing a Sonic State interview, so it'd be good to talk about sort of gear and your hardware and things that you use.
Yeah, and in the early days,
over the years.
In the early days, I had a Gretsch Country Club, but I soon got rid of that because I realised that what people wanted to hear was not the Gretsch sound. It was either a Fender or a Gibson sound, so I swapped it for a Telecaster. So my early sessions were on Telecaster, and then I realised I wanted a Gibson Les Paul, and I used to bring them both on sessions, the Gibson and the Fender, because between the Gibson and the Fender you can get most guitar sounds. So that's what we didn't used to use pedals or fuzz. You could use a fuzz box, and I think the wah-wah had come in, but we hardly ever used them. I always used a Fender Deluxe reverb amp, and if I wanted distortion or overdrive, I just used to turn it up loud. And there was no choruses, and there was no like delays. There's none of that. Well, not for me anyway. People knew that I would be the guy without the pedals. I didn't even like to use a wah-wah.
That's amazing, really, given that.
Well, nowadays
people, nowadays is you have people with 35 pedals in front of them
and no amp. You go straight into the board.
Right. Yeah.
From the pedal board. Yeah, but I still use the amp, and I've still got the same amp that I bought in 1970. Deluxe
Amazing,
reverb, Fender
really.
Deluxe reverb. I was able to use it.
Wow.
I was able to use it in the United States because it had a transformer on the back, so I was able to twist this transformer and make it work on 110 volts, then twist it back again and make it work on 220 volts. So I was able to have had that amplifier with me the whole time. So yeah, towards the late 70s, the sound that everybody wanted was a kind of overdriven sound, very similar to what you get from Steve Jones on the Sex Pistols, which is why I think a lot of people thought that it was me instead of him. That overdriven rhythm guitar sound, that was the sound of the guitar that people wanted. It's changed now, thank goodness. People want more interesting guitar sounds, clean sounds with a little bit of delay, sounds with a bit of chorus. But I usually wait for the mixing stage to add those effects, because once you put them on, you're stuck with the chorus or with the delay. You don't always want that. I like to present a sort of nice workable guitar sound that's got no effects, and no echoes or delays. And then people can do what they want with it. They can process the sound afterwards when they see how it fits into the record. And
That
sometimes,
is an incredibly logical way of working.
well, I'm old school. I'm old school.
Yeah. And because I mean, the development of music technology over the years has been exponentially massive.
Yes, well, I think what a lot of guitar players I come across that use pedals, what they forget is that if you took those pedals away, there's an area of about 6 to 8 inches from between the bridge and the neck, where if you pick in different parts of that, or if you mute with the fleshy part of your right hand, you mute over the bridge. There's all these a whole world of different sounds, and if you rely on a pedal to get those sounds, you're not using the guitar properly. I just use the sound that's coming out of the guitar using a different part of the string near the bridge for one sort of sound, and then you move another inch along towards the neck, and the sound completely changes. And you're going to lose that ability to change the sound or be in command of your sound if you use a pedal, because it tends to just make the sound just sort of the same. You lose the ability to create a sound, a subtle sound.
So, yeah, exactly. The subtlety is lost, isn't it? If you're just running it through a pedal, the pedal probably doesn't have quite the nuance that.
It has its own sound, and it's the sound of that pedal, and you that player will end up losing the added tonal palette of just playing the string without any effects, just playing it straight to an amplifier, or if it's on acoustic, just not to an amplifier. It's the same thing goes with an acoustic.
It's a good lesson. It's a good lesson for people who are sort of getting into music. How do you feel about the wealth of things that you can make music with nowadays?
Well, the advent of the digital recording and the fact that most musicians can get Pro Tools in their spare room, like I've got here, that is a fantastic development, because it means people that couldn't afford a studio or couldn't afford to hire session musicians, because session musicians are who you hire when you have an expensive band. You've got like about 5 musicians, 2 guitar players, a keyboard player, a drummer, bass player. That's expensive, and so is the studio, that you have to have a lot of expensive mics, that you have to have an engineer who knows what he's doing, and you have to have a certain amount of musical know-how to be able to direct those musicians to play your song properly. Those days are now over. This is why the session scene is not the same as it was. The days when you actually book a band to play your song, there are orchestrals, big group sessions, of course, but you don't need to do that now. You have technology. I mean, my setup here it's only got 2 inputs. I put drum machine in one, get a drum, and I can put proper drums on later. If I got a really good track, I can take my drum machine, guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, and vocal track to get proper drums put on to make it sound more old school. So I think the way that it's helped talented individuals who are not musicians, who don't have the chops, don't have the ability, they can make music, and they can be very successful. And they basically put people like me out of work.
Yeah, I think, there's a huge sort of sample industry nowadays where you can buy drum beats, you can buy drum part, bass lines and all that kind of thing, which only really existed after about 2005.
Yeah.
So there's been a huge development in terms of popular music and what people can put out.
About how people can make music. People can make music now that wouldn't have been able to start in the 70s, 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Going to your solo work, you've released 14 studio albums.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And the last one was 10 years ago, Joyland.
That's right. Yeah.
Fantastic album with Bryan Ferry's on that album.
Yes, I had some guests.
Well.
I had some guests on that album.
Yeah, Johnny Marr's on it.
Yeah, and Arthur Brown.
Yeah.
Arthur Brown did some good singing on it. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that album and
Well, it was the
together?
record. It was the record company that came up with the idea of getting guests on it, because I'd been a guest on a couple of. What's the name? Cleopatra out of LA. They're the record company.
Mm-hmm.
I played on. I think it was a Dave Davies record, or was it somebody else? Maybe somebody else. So they had a thing of getting guests, thinking that it would make the widen the appeal or the potential audience for a record if you had guests. So I went with it. I thought it's worth trying. So we did that. We basically made the record and then chose who we would want to play, like the bass part. I had the bass part. I had the bass part that Andy Fraser was going to play, but I took the bass off and sent him the record. And then for Bryan Ferry, I knew that I wanted him to sing the song, but I sung it first, and then gave him a version without me, so that we got him to sing on it. Same with Arthur Brown and Glenn Matlock. We took the bass off the song, so that's how we did it. We basically made the record, and then when we chose the artist who was going to guest on it, we took their part off so that they could replace it with their part. So at least they had a little idea of what we needed from them. And in some instances, they gave us a little more than we wanted, or a little more than we expected, which was good. Yeah. So
it's a great way of working.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's yeah. I don't know about making albums now. It's almost like a vanity project, because there are no CD shops where you can go and look at CDs and hear them, and it's all like downloads of a certain song that you might like. I don't really understand how to monetize it, because before we would be paid by a record company. Which of course the record company did pay me for Joyland, but it wasn't very much. You hope to make it back on royalties from record sales, but there's no such thing as record sales these days as Spotify sales. Which I think I read somewhere, it must have been on Facebook somewhere, that Pharrell Williams, the guy that wrote Happy, you know that song?
I do, yes.
Well, global hit, right? You'd think the guy would earn quite a little bit of money. There was a guy at Spotify whose job it was to get on the computer and compile what all the Spotify artists would get in their monthly royalty check. And at the height of Happy by Pharrell Williams, the guy realized that his monthly check as an employee of Spotify was greater than what he was selling Pharrell Williams for a global hit, a sort of hit that you only got, some people didn't even get once in their career. So this is
absolutely, yeah.
This is
song.
This is indicative of how our business is in the doldrums, as it were, or we can't really make the sort of money that we used to make before.
Absolutely.
There's no incentive. There's no incentive for us to go in the studio and make an album. Who's going to buy it? Who's going to hear it? Who's going to value it? So
that's true, and I think
that's why it was 10 years ago that I last made a record. Nobody's really asked me since.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex world. I think a lot of bands are making money from their merchandise.
Yeah, they make the money from playing gigs, from selling merchandise, yeah. In fact, I once made the observation to a bandmate of mine and said, we're not in the CD business anymore, we're in the T-shirt business. Because to make a T-shirt, all you need is an image, a design, and the T-shirts are dirt cheap. You can buy a T-shirt for about £5 or something, and then you print your image on it, and you can sell it for £30, which is more than you can sell a CD for. And look what the amount of talent and technology has gone into making a CD, the amount of time.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying we're not in this record business anymore. We're in the T-shirt business.
That's true. That is true. It's kind of a never-ending sort of it's a groove buster, really. It's a groove buster for the music scene.
It is, yes. I mean, there's obviously going to still be music, and people are going to be music fans. But there was a kind of golden age that happened in the 60s and 70s that started to fizzle out in the 80s.
Definitely. In terms of like listening to music, what are you kind of into at the moment, and what sort of artists do you recommend people check out if they perhaps haven't heard them?
Well, I tend to sort of hear people by accident. I kind of like the wet leg thing, Chaise Long. Kind of like that. I just like the idea of it, and they just did it really well, and it's very charming. It has a certain charm to it, which is very important. You've got to charm people to buy a record these days, and that's what Wet Leg does. And I was a big fan of Amy Winehouse. She had enough of that old R&B thing going for her, old Motown Stax sort of bluesy arrangements and songs.
Yeah, amazing artists.
And I must admit, I'm not really a bit old school. I'm a big admirer of the band. Their first two albums. I just think that's fantastic music, and it's basically Americana music. And I like the old Motown stuff, and the Stax and High Records. You know, like which is the guy that worked with Al Green. High Records. It's like a spin-off of Stax. They're out of Memphis. I'll remember him when we Googleable.
It's another Googleable one, isn't it?
Yeah. That guy. He made amazing. He made I Can't Stand the Rain by Ann Peebles. That sort of stuff. That whole album's fantastic. You can make the whole album. Every track sounds like the last one. So it has that sort of continuity to it. And every time the drummer plays a fill, it's the same fill. I think that's fantastic. And it doesn't sound like that's all I could think of. It sounds like the perfect fill. He got the perfect drum fill. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, boom. You just do that double beat, and that's all you'd get. And it's fantastic.
That's definitely like those Phil Spector records. That definitely, the way you're describing that is definitely how those records come across to me, with those perfect.
Yeah, pare it all down, refine your part so that it couldn't be better. You couldn't play that part better. It's the ultimate way to play that part, and that's what these guys did on those High records. And they didn't bother playing different drum fills and different fills. They just played the same thing every time, and it was fucking immaculate, fantastic. You know, it was just exactly what's needed. So those are the records that I like.
I mean, there's so much within your career. I'm sure we could talk for hours, but I don't want to keep you. So thank you very much for speaking to me today, Chris.
Okay, well, I'm glad we sorted our gremlins out.
Yeah, amazing career. Like, as I say, this could be a 3-hour, 4-hour interview easily. I've just got so many notes on your career. I've got 3 pages of this. So,
all right.
Yeah, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, let me know when you finished it and edited it.
Oh, what a great conversation with Chris. He's worked with so many people. There are so many stories. As I said, that interview could probably have gone on for much, much longer. We could have dived into so much, but great to hear stories about the Sex Pistols, his work with the Sharks, and 14 studio albums. That is pretty bloody incredible. Thanks to Chris very much, and thanks to Marina Moore for suggesting that he should be a guest. Always appreciated. Okay, that is it for another show. I would love to recommend an interview that I did with an artist called Emma, E.M.M.A. A really amazing artist who's done soundtracks for like Gucci adverts, as well as running her own Pastel Prism record label and running workshops for girl producers alongside some other artists. So yes, go and check out my episode where I interviewed Emma a couple of years ago from Series 1. Thank you very much for listening once again. You can support Sonic State on Patreon if you like. You can also support us on YouTube if you'd prefer to do that. Look out for another episode coming up very soon, and I'll see you again then.